I took a deep breath, trying to calm the heat rising in my chest. $500 every month over a flower pot? I looked around the neighborhood. Mrs. Rodriguez across the street had a dozen hanging plants on her porch. No violation. The Wilsons had garden gnomes lining their walkway. No violation. But somehow my single blue-flowered pot was a problem. I already knew who was behind this. Nancy Blake, our self-appointed queen of the HOA, ruling over the neighborhood with her clipboard, designer sunglasses, and power-tripping an attitude. She was the kind of person who treated HOA rules like her personal kingdom, enforcing them when it suited her, ignoring them when it didn't. And now she was coming for me. I stormed inside, slapping the violation notice onto the kitchen table. My wife, Emily, looked up from her laptop, concerned. "Another one?" I nodded, running a hand through my hair. "They're fining us $500 a month, over a flower pot." Her eyebrows shot up. "A flower pot?" I tapped the paper. "Apparently it's an unauthorized outdoor decoration." Emily scoffed. "Oh, but Nancy's yard is a disaster. She has weeds taller than my car." She wasn't wrong. Nancy's own front yard looked like an abandoned lot. Overgrown hedges, paint chipping from her porch railing, and at least 3 permanently parked cars in her driveway. Yet somehow she never seemed to find herself. I clenched my jaw. Enough was enough. This wasn't just about a flower pot. This was about power, about Nancy making an example out of people she didn't like. And if she thought she could push me around, she had no idea what was coming. What Nancy didn't know was that for the last 6 years, I had been quietly buying up properties in the neighborhood. Through different LLCs under different names, I had slowly but surely gained majority ownership of the entire development, 68%, more than enough to take control of the HOA itself. I grabbed my laptop and pulled up my files: property deeds, board meeting records, financial statements. Everything I had gathered, every shady fee she had implemented, every rule she selectively enforced. And then I made a call. "Hey, Mike, it's time." Mike was my lawyer. He had been waiting for this moment just as long as I had. Because tonight Nancy had scheduled an emergency HOA meeting. She thought it was to discuss problem homeowners, me in particular. But by the time the meeting was over, Nancy wouldn't be president anymore. She wouldn't even be in control. I smirked, folding the violation notice neatly in half before tossing it into the trash. Nancy had no idea what was coming, and I couldn't wait to watch her fall. Nancy Blake loved power, and the HOA gave her just enough of it to make everyone's lives miserable. She treated the community like her personal fiefdom, acting as if the neighborhood was her own private kingdom and the rest of us were just peasants who needed to obey. If you were on her good side, you got special treatment. If your house needed a new coat of paint, no problem. If you had an extra car parked on the street for a few days, she'd look the other way. But if you were on Nancy's bad side, she made sure you paid for it. I had seen it happen over and over again. Take Mrs. Rodriguez, a sweet 82-year-old widow who had lived in the neighborhood for nearly 20 years. She barely left her house except when her grandson visited on weekends. Last month, he left his bike leaning against her porch overnight. The next morning, a $200 fine for excessive clutter. Then there was Mark, the single dad who moved in last year. His offense? His front door was the wrong shade of beige. According to Nancy, it clashed with the aesthetic of the community. He got slapped with a $150 fine and was told to repaint it immediately, or else. I even heard rumors that she once fined a veteran for putting up an American flag, claimed it wasn't within community guidelines. Yet somehow her own house, a complete disaster. Nancy's hedges were so overgrown they were spilling onto the sidewalk. Her fence had peeling paint and a broken gate, and her 3 cars, they sat in her driveway year-round, while she handed out tickets to anyone else who dared park in the street for more than a few hours. Hypocrisy at its finest, and she wasn't stopping. She was only getting worse, raising fees, pushing new ridiculous rules, and selectively enforcing them against anyone who dared question her. It was only a matter of time before she came for me. And when that bright orange violation notice landed on my door, I knew my time had come. But what Nancy didn't know was that I had been waiting for this moment. For the past 6 years, I had been quietly buying up properties in the neighborhood. Every time a house went on the market, I made sure I was the one to buy it, using different LLCs to keep my name hidden. It started as an investment, but when I saw the way Nancy ran things, it became something more. Now, I own 68% of the neighborhood, more than enough to control the HOA itself. And tonight, Nancy thought she was walking into an emergency meeting to punish problem homeowners. But by the time the meeting ended, she'd be the one packing her bags. She just didn't know it yet, and I was going to enjoy watching her fall. At first, I let her believe she was winning. I played along, paid the petty fines, showed up to the HOA meetings, sitting quietly in the back while she droned on about preserving the integrity of the neighborhood. I nodded when she lectured homeowners about keeping their trash cans out of sight. I smiled when she threatened fines over mailbox colors and driveway cracks. I let her think she was in control. But what Nancy didn't know was I had been planning my move for years. While she was strutting around the neighborhood, clipboard in hand, ruling with an iron fist, I was playing the long game. See, every time a house went up for sale, I made sure I was the one to buy it. Not in my name, of course. That would have been too obvious. Instead, I used different LLCs, each one a separate business entity, each one appearing like just another ordinary real estate investor. To Nancy and the HOA board, it looked like a random mix of landlords and private buyers were purchasing homes in the neighborhood. In reality, they were all me. I didn't just buy properties. I made sure I controlled enough to matter. It started as an investment strategy. But the more I watched Nancy abuse her power, the more I realized I wasn't just buying houses. I was buying control. And now I own 68% of the entire development. That number wasn't just for show. That number meant I had more voting power than the entire HOA board combined. Nancy had spent years bullying homeowners, issuing fines, and creating new rules without consequence. She thought she was untouchable. But tonight was different. She had scheduled an emergency HOA meeting, the kind she called when she wanted to make an example out of someone. I already knew the agenda. I was the agenda. She planned to push through a new set of restrictions, ones that would give the HOA even more power to fine and punish homeowners for minor infractions. And conveniently, these new rules would specifically target rental properties, which she assumed belonged to outsiders. She had no idea those properties belonged to me. Tonight, she thought she was going to tighten her grip on the neighborhood. She thought she was about to remind everyone who was in charge. But in just a few hours, when I walked into that meeting and laid all my cards on the table, Nancy was going to realize the truth. She wasn't the queen of the HOA. She wasn't even in control anymore. Because when you own the majority of the neighborhood, you own the kingdom. And tonight, I was taking everything from her. The room was so silent you could hear the faint hum of the projector still running. Nancy's fingers twitched around her gavel. Her eyes darted from me to the stack of property deeds I had just placed on the table. One by one, the whispers in the room grew louder. "What does he mean, 68%? Someone muttered. Another homeowner leaned in to look at the papers. Deeds, dozens of them, each one proof that I own more of this neighborhood than anyone else in the room. Nancy swallowed hard, but she wasn't ready to give up. Not yet. She forced a laugh, trying to brush off my statement. "Oh, please. Even if that were true, it doesn't change anything. The HOA board makes the decisions here, not you." I smiled. "Actually, Nancy, that's where you are wrong." I reached into my folder and pulled out one more document. "This," I said, holding it up for everyone to see, "is a copy of our HOA bylaws, specifically Section 7, which outlines the voting rights of property owners." Nancy's face turned rigid. I flipped to the highlighted section and read it aloud. "Any property owner or entity holding a majority stake in the community retains voting control over all proposed HOA policies and leadership decisions." I paused, looking straight at Nancy. "And as of today, that majority stake belongs to me." Gasps erupted across the room. Nancy bolted to her feet. "This is a trick. There's no way." I turned to the crowd. "Would anyone like to verify the paperwork?" A few homeowners eagerly stepped forward, skimming through the documents. It didn't take long before one of them, Chen, a former HOA supporter, spoke up. "These are real," he said, shaking his head in disbelief. "He really owns the majority." Nancy's breath hitched. For the first time all night, her confidence cracked. I stepped closer. "For years, you've fined good people over nonsense. You've used HOA money to fund your own home projects while ignoring real community issues. You've bullied, harassed, and made life miserable for anyone who didn't fit into your little vision of perfection." I gestured toward the stack of violations on the projector screen. Pictures of my flower pot, my car, my mailbox. "This meeting was meant to be a show trial," I said. "A way for you to make an example out of me. But instead, Nancy—" I leaned in, my voice just loud enough for the whole room to hear. "Tonight is the night you lose everything." Nancy's grip on her gavel tightened. She looked around, hoping for backup. But this time, no one came to her defense, because the truth was finally out, and her reign was over. Nancy's breathing grew shallow as the whispers in the room turned into full-blown murmurs. The homeowners, her once loyal subjects, were turning on her. Mrs. Rodriguez, the elderly woman Nancy had fined for her grandson's bicycle, shook her head in disgust. Mr. Chen, who had once defended Nancy's policies, stared at the projector screen in disbelief. "Nancy, is this true?" a voice called from the back. She slammed her gavel down on the podium. "This is a smear campaign, a setup." She whipped around to the board members desperate for support. "Are you really going to listen to this nonsense?" But the board members weren't looking at her. They were looking at me. I stepped forward, holding up the thick binder of bank statements, invoices, and emails. "This isn't a setup, Nancy. These are receipts. HOA money that was supposed to be used for community maintenance, park upgrades, and road repairs. Instead, it was funneled into your personal accounts." I flipped to a highlighted expense report. 15,000 spent on landscaping improvements, but only for your backyard. $12,000 for community event catering, except there was no event. 3,800 on security fees, and yet somehow all those security cameras only monitored your street. A hush fell over the room. Nancy's face turned a deep shade of red. "This is out of context. I had board approval." "You forged signatures, Nancy," I cut in. "We have emails confirming that too." Her lip quivered. I wasn't done. I turned back to the screen. The security footage continued rolling. There she was at 2 a.m. in her bathrobe, holding a ruler up to my flower pot. The audience burst into whispers. Then another clip, Nancy walking past her own overgrown yard, stepping over a broken fence while fining Mrs. Rodriguez for a harmless garden gnome. And then, the most damning clip of all. Nancy in broad daylight, signing off on HOA funds, not for community improvements, but for brand new patio furniture for her backyard. She stumbled back a step. "This is ridiculous. You have no proof." I smirked and gestured toward the back of the room. The doors swung open. A local news crew walked in, cameras rolling. Nancy's face went ghost white. A reporter adjusted her mic. "Nancy Blake, is it true you've been misusing HOA funds? What do you say to the homeowners who trusted you?" Nancy spun toward the exit, but two reporters had already blocked her path. She had nowhere to run. Her hand trembled as she grabbed her purse, shoving papers inside in a panic. I watched her scramble, completely undone as I folded my arms. And then, in a calm, steady voice, I said the words that sealed her fate. This was checkmate. The morning after the meeting, Nancy was gone. She didn't bother facing the community. No apologies, no farewell speech, just a mass email claiming that she was being forced out by an angry mob. A few of her old loyalists grumbled about the change, but most of the neighborhood, they celebrated. By noon, Nancy's moving truck was parked outside her house. She stuffed her things into boxes, avoiding eye contact with every neighbor who walked past. And just like that, she was gone. But here's the best part. Nancy bragged that she was moving to a better neighborhood with higher standards. I looked up the place. Gated community, fancy homes, an HOA that made ours look like a walk in the park. And what happened on her very first day there? She got fined for parking in the wrong spot. Oh, the irony. Meanwhile, back in our community, we got to work. We dissolved the old HOA board and held a vote to elect real homeowners, people who actually cared about the neighborhood. No more ridiculous fines, no more 3 a.m. inspections. Within a few months, property values started going up. Families painted their homes the colors they actually liked. Kids played basketball in their driveways without worrying about a noise violation. And the best part? The HOA fees actually went down. Turns out when money isn't being pocketed by a corrupt board, it can actually be used for things that benefit the community. Funny how that works. Now looking back, I can't help but laugh. Nancy thought she was untouchable. She thought she could keep running the HOA like her personal kingdom forever. But the truth? She never had control. The power always belonged to the people. She just never thought we'd take it back. And that, my friends, is how you take down a corrupt HOA, by beating them at their own game. But now I want to hear from you. Have you ever dealt with an HOA nightmare? A ridiculous fine? A power-hungry board member? Tell me your story in the comments. And if you love HOA revenge stories, make sure to like and subscribe for more crazy tales from Strom Tales. Until next time, stay smart, stay strong, and never let an HOA push you around.